The ceramic gnome flew over the fence in a perfect arc, shattering on the driveway a 42 Primrose Lane with a sound that made Karen Westfield flinch to spike herself. She smoothed her blonde bob with one hand, clutching her HOA rulebook in the other as she watched James Chen, her neighbor of precisely 8 months and 14 days, storm out of his house. "What the hell, Karen?" James' voice carried across the immaculate front lawns of Sunshine Meadows, a gated community where property values were discussed with the reverence others reserved for religion. "That was a gift from my daughter." Karen's thin lips pressed together in a line as straight as the neighborhood's regulations on acceptable fence heights. Section 7, paragraph 3 clearly states that garden ornaments exceeding 12 inches in height require HOA approval. Your figurine was at least 14 inches. James stared at her, his mouth open. "You threw it over my fence because it was 2 inches too tall?" "I removed an unauthorized decoration after 3 written warnings," Karen corrected, her voice as crisp as her iron khakis. "The HOA handbook is very clear on this matter." Several neighbors had emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion. Karen noticed Barbara Miller recording with her phone and felt a flash of satisfaction. "Let them all see how a proper HOA president handled violations. It's a garden gnome, not a billboard for adult services," James said, picking up a piece of the shattered ceramic. "My 7-year-old painted this for me." Karen felt a momentary twinge in her chest but pushed it aside. Rules were rules. Without them, chaos would reign and property values would plummet. Her ex-husband had always said her inability to bend was her worst quality. Her perfectionism had cost her a marriage, but it had won her the HOA presidency 3 years running. "You can fill out Form 32B for garden ornament approval for any future decorations," she said, turning to leave. "The committee meets next Thursday." The neighbors were whispering now. Karen straightened her shoulders, remembering what her life coach had told her about projecting authority. At 52, newly divorced, with her son away at college, the HOA was her domain, her purpose. "This isn't over," James called after her. Karen didn't turn around. Idle threats were beneath her notice. In 15 years of homeowners association involvement, she heard it all. People always backed down eventually. The rules always won. That evening, as Karen updated her violation spreadsheet, adding James Chen's infraction to his growing list, improper mailbox color, unauthorized wind chimes, recycling bin left out until 6:05 p.m., her phone buzzed with a notification. Someone had tagged her in a community Facebook post. It was a photo of the broken gnome pieces arranged in a small circle with tea candles around them. The caption read, "Memorial service for Gnome McQuentyhat, cruelly executed by HOA decree for the crime of being 2 inches too tall. #justice for Gnome." Karen's face burned. 67 reactions, already mostly laughing emojis. This was undermining her authority. She immediately reported the post for harassment, then drafted a notice about the community's social media policy. As she prepared for bed that night, following her precise 15-step skincare routine, Karen couldn't shake the image of the shattered gnome. For a fleeting moment, she wondered if she'd overreacted. Then she remembered the developer's warning about property values dropping 15% in communities with lax HOA enforcement. No, she decided, setting her alarm for 6 a.m., early enough to check for overnight violations before her power walk. She'd done the right thing. The rules existed for a reason. Karen couldn't possibly know that the gnome incident was merely the opening salvo in what would become the most challenging battle of her HOA career, one that would ultimately force her to question everything she stood for. 3 days after the gnome execution, Karen was conducting her morning inspection when she spotted it. A small garden flamingo in James Chen's yard. It stood precisely 11.5 inches tall. She measured it discreetly with the pocket laser measure she carried for such occasions, keeping it just within regulation height. The flamingo wore a tiny t-shirt that read, "I'm not with stupid," with an arrow pointing in the direction of Karen's house. Karen's nostrils flared as she snapped a photo for her records. It was clearly targeted harassment, but technically within guidelines. This was the problem with people like James Chen. They found loopholes instead of simply complying with the spirit of the rules. "Good morning, Karen," James called cheerfully from his porch, coffee mug in hand. "I see you've met Flammy." "Don't worry, I measured him 3 times. Karen forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Cute. Very whimsical." "Oh, he's just the beginning," James replied with an unsettling grin. "I've been reading the HOA handbook cover to cover. Fascinating document." By the end of the week, James had added 7 more regulation-compliant flamingos, each wearing different miniature outfits. Neighbors began walking past his house specifically to see the new additions. Someone created an Instagram account called it Flamingo Fashion Week that gained over 200 followers. At the monthly HOA meeting, Karen attempted to introduce an emergency amendment to the decoration policy, but was stunned when it failed to pass. Several board members even commented on the charming flamingo display, bringing character to the neighborhood. Character? Karen had sputtered. Is that what we're calling it when someone deliberately flouts the spirit of our regulations? Barbara Miller, who'd served as HOA treasurer for 5 years, actually rolled her eyes. Karen, maybe we should focus on real issues. The community playground needs repairs, and the south entrance landscaping is dying. Betrayal stung sharp and sudden. These people had elected her to maintain standards. Now they were prioritizing playground equipment over the slow-motion collapse of civilization happening on James Chen's front lawn. That night, Karen received an anonymous envelope in her mailbox. Inside was a glossy brochure for Solar Horizons Retirement Community, where rules are meant to be enjoyed, not enforced. The handwriting on the envelope looked suspiciously like Barbara's. Karen poured herself a larger-than-usual glass of Chardonnay. Her phone buzzed with a notification. Another post from at Flamingo Fashion Week showing today's new edition. A flamingo in a blonde wig and khaki pants, holding a tiny clipboard. Sleep eluded her. At 2 a.m., she found herself scrolling through community forums for other HOAs, seeking advice on handling problem residents. In one thread, she recognized the warning signs of what was happening. She was becoming a meme, a caricature. The neighborhood joke. The next morning, exhausted and irritable, Karen spotted James measuring something in his yard. When he saw her washing, he waved cheerfully. Morning, Karen. Just making sure everything's up to code. By afternoon, a new decoration had appeared. A small dinosaur skeleton, precisely 11.75 inches tall, posed as if it were running away from Karen's house. A tiny sign next to it read, Extinction Event. Flood from prehistoric HOA enforcement. Karen took 3 deep breaths, following her therapist's advice for managing triggers. This was deliberate provocation. She would not give him the satisfaction of a reaction. But when she returned from her afternoon errands, she discovered the situation had evolved. There were now 6 dinosaur skeletons arranged in different poses. Worse, neighborhood children were gathered around while James explained dinosaur facts. And this one, she overheard him saying, is called a Caranosaurus rex. Very dangerous. Known for its rigid thinking and inability to adapt to changing environments. The children giggled. Karen felt her face burn as she hurried inside, already drafting a noise complaint in her head. Public ridicule was not covered specifically in the HOA guidelines, but surely there was something she could cite. As she closed her door, she caught sight of Barbara taking photos of the dinosaur display, laughing openly. Karen arrived at the emergency HOA meeting 15 minutes early, armed with a 3-ring binder containing meticulously labeled tabs, precedents, property value studies, visual evidence, and proposed amendments. She'd spent 3 sleepless nights preparing her case against what she now referred to as the Chen situation. To her dismay, attendance was unusually high. Homeowners who hadn't shown interest in years were suddenly present, many wearing small plastic flamingo pins. Karen pretended not to notice. I call this emergency meeting to order, she announced, banging her gavel perhaps more forcefully than necessary. Our first agenda item concerns decorative displays that, while technically within size regulations, violate community standards through excessive quantity and provocative messaging. Barbara Miller cleared her throat. I move to add an item to the agenda, discussion of board overreach and selective enforcement. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Karen felt her control slipping. James Chen's dinosaur display now includes 15 individual pieces, Karen continued, flipping to her evidence tab. While each is under 12 inches, the collective display creates an eyesore visible from the street. Point of order, called Raja Patel, a normally quiet resident from Mockingbird Lane. The rulebook specifies individual ornament height, not collective impact. If we're changing interpretation, we should also review the 7 garden gnomes at the Wilkinsons' house and the extensive fairy garden at the Johnsons' property. Karen hadn't anticipated this line of attack. The Wilkinsons and Johnsons were her allies, longtime residents who brought homemade cookies to meetings and never questioned her authority. Those are different situations, she stammered. How exactly? James Chen asked, speaking for the first time. He'd come dressed in a button-down shirt and tie, looking frustratingly professional. Is it because they're your friends, Karen? Or is it because I'm the only homeowner under 40 in this room? Or maybe because I'm the only Asian American resident who's ever challenged you? A heavy silence fell. Karen felt trapped, cornered like the dinosaurs James had arranged in his prehistoric display. That's completely inappropriate, she managed. This isn't personal, isn't it? James stood up, holding a folder of his own. I've documented 27 instances in the past year where violations by certain homeowners were ignored while others received immediate notices. There's a pattern here. He distributed copies of his analysis. Karen watched in horror as her carefully constructed authority crumbled with each paper passed around. Furthermore, James continued, I'd like to introduce a motion to create a decoration review committee that doesn't include board members with documented bias. The vote passed 28-3. As the meeting adjourned, Karen sat alone at the front table, stunned by the revolt. Barbara approached hesitantly. Karen, this isn't what any of us wanted, she said quietly, but you've been different since the divorce. More rigid, more controlling. I'm simply enforcing the rules we all agreed to, Karen replied stiffly. Barbara sighed. Rules are meant to serve the community, not the other way around. When was the last time you actually talked to your neighbors instead of measuring their violations? The question hit with unexpected force. Karen couldn't remember. Her calendar was filled with inspection times, meeting dates, and violation follow-ups. When had her life become so narrowly focused? As she drove home, Karen noticed details she'd been blind to. Children playing in yards with non-regulation toys, a beautiful rose garden that technically violated the approved plant list, an elderly couple sitting on a porch swing that hadn't been formally approved. For a fleeting moment, she saw the neighborhood as a living, breathing community rather than a set of properties to be regulated. The thought was both liberating and terrifying. That night, she checked at Flamingo Fashion Week despite herself. The latest post showed the dinosaurs arranged around a miniature conference table, apparently holding their own meeting. The caption read, Democracy in action. The dinosaurs have voted. Fun wins over extinction. By the following weekend, Sunshine Meadows had split into factions. Team Karen, primarily long-term residents from the north side, versus Team Dinosaur, a mix of newer homeowners, families with children, and those who'd harbored long-standing resentments against HOA policies. Karen maintained a dignified silence publicly, but privately she was strategizing. The Decoration Review Committee, now mockingly called the Fun Police by her opponents, had approved James' dinosaur display as whimsical community art. Her authority was being undermined daily. She found unexpected solace in her garden. After her weekend power walks became uncomfortable due to neighbors' stares and whispers, Karen had retreated to her backyard, meticulously tending roses that few would ever see. Her therapist called it healthy displacement activity. Karen called it survival. On Wednesday afternoon, while deadheading her prized peace roses, Karen spotted movement over the fence. James Chen was installing something new. Despite herself, curiosity won out. She casually moved to her side gate, ostensibly to take out recycling, and glanced over. What she saw made her drop her garden shears. James had created a full-size dinosaur skeleton, easily 7 feet tall, constructed from what appeared to be PVC pipes painted white. It dominated his front yard like a museum exhibit. This is absolutely unacceptable. Karen found herself shouting before she could stop herself. James looked up, seemingly unsurprised by her appearance. Actually, it's completely within guidelines. The HOA rulebook refers specifically to permanent structures and decorations. This is temporary. I'll be taking it down each night and reassembling it in the morning. That's a loophole. A completely legal one, James replied calmly. I ran it by the new committee. They approved it unanimously. Karen felt a vein throbbing in her temple. This is a respected community, not Jurassic Park. Funny you should mention that, James said, attaching the dinosaur's skull. The neighborhood kids are putting on a dinosaur-themed play here on Saturday. We've already got 20 families attending. You're welcome to join us. The invitation seemed genuine, which somehow made it worse. Karen retreated without responding, her mind racing. A neighborhood event organized without HOA approval, in violation of the gathering's policy that required permits for any assembly over 10 people. This was the ammunition she needed. That evening, Karen drafted violation notices for unpermitted gathering, noise ordinance preemption, and improper use of residential property. She cited bylaws, attached photographic evidence of the dinosaur construction, and made copies for the entire board. As she worked, her phone persistently buzzed with neighborhood group chat notifications. She'd been deliberately excluded from the dinosaur play planning, but Barbara had accidentally included her in a message thread. The neighbors were discussing potluck contributions, volunteer face painters, and someone's husband would play guitar and would provide music. It sounded fun. The kind of neighborhood gathering Karen had envisioned when she first moved to Sunshine Meadows 15 years ago before her bitter divorce, before the HOA presidency became her identity. For a fleeting moment, doubt crept in. Was she becoming the neighborhood villain in her quest to maintain standards? The thought was interrupted by an email notification. The HOA's property management company had forwarded a complaint with her name prominently mentioned, describing harassment and selective enforcement against newer homeowners. There were hints of potential legal action. Karen's resolve hardened. She was protecting property values and community standards. If no one else understood that, it was their failing, not hers. She sealed the violation notices in envelopes ready for delivery the next morning. But as she prepared for bed, following her rigid nighttime routine, Karen caught sight of something through her bedroom window. James Chen was in his garage working late, helping his young daughter paint what appeared to be a paper-mache dinosaur egg. The child was laughing, her face alight with joy as her father feigned terror at the hatching dinosaur. It was precisely the kind of moment Karen had once imagined sharing with her own son, before her perfectionism and rigid adherence to rules had created a distance between them that her occasional texts couldn't bridge. Saturday arrived with perfect weather, minus 75 degrees and cloudless skies, as if even nature had sided with Team Dinosaur. Karen watched from behind her living room curtains as families streamed toward James Chen's yard, carrying folding chairs and potluck dishes. Children raced ahead, many wearing homemade dinosaur costumes. The violation notices remained on her kitchen counter, undelivered. Karen had spent a restless night debating her options. Filing the violations would be technically correct, but would solidify her position as neighborhood villain. Ignoring such a blatant disregard for HOA protocols, however, felt like surrendering everything she stood for. At precisely 1 p.m., cheerful music drifted through the neighborhood. Karen's curiosity finally overcame her pride. She slipped out her back door, circled the block, and approached James' yard from the opposite direction, hoping to observe unnoticed. What she saw stopped her in her tracks. James' yard had been transformed into a miniature amphitheater. The PVC Dinosaur Skeleton served as a backdrop for a small stage area where children were performing what appeared to be a musical about dinosaurs learning to coexist with mammals. Parents sat in chairs arranged in semicircles, laughing and recording on their phones. In the driveway, tables overflowed with potluck offerings. Barbara was serving lemonade. Raju's teenage son was helping younger children with dinosaur face painting. The Wilkinsons, her supposed allies, were there, Harold manning a grill while Dorothy arranged cookies on a platter. It was a scene of community togetherness that made Karen's chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't immediately identify. "Karen, you came." James' daughter Sophie spotted her and came running over, her face painted with green scales. "Do you want to see my egg? I'm the dinosaur scientist in the play." Before Karen could formulate a response, Sophie had grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the display of paper-mache creations. James looked up from adjusting a child's costume, surprise evident on his face. To his credit, he recovered quickly. "Glad you could join us, Karen. There's plenty of food if you're hungry." Karen stood frozen, acutely aware of neighbors watching, waiting for her reaction. This was clearly a test. Would she shut down the unauthorized gathering or acknowledge defeat? Neither option felt right. The dinosaurs looked very scientifically accurate, she managed to say, addressing Sophie rather than James. Sophie beamed. "Daddy and I researched them at the library. Did you know T-Rexes had feathers? Everyone thinks they were just scaly, but that's not true." The child's enthusiasm was infectious. Karen found herself listening to dinosaur facts, examining Sophie's carefully painted egg, and eventually accepting a plate of food from Barbara. "We saved you a seat," Barbara said, gesturing to an empty chair near the front. It was an olive branch, a chance to be part of the community rather than its overseer. The play itself was charmingly amateur, forgotten lines, dropped props, and a memorable moment when the volcano backdrop fell over. But the children's enthusiasm was undeniable, and the parents' pride palpable. During the final musical number, something about dinosaurs teaching humans to adapt or face extinction. Karen caught James watching her reaction. The metaphor wasn't exactly subtle. After applause and bows as families mingled and children ran between yards, James approached her. "I expected violation notices this morning," he said quietly. "What changed your mind?" Karen considered deflecting but found herself answering honestly. "I'm not entirely sure. Maybe I wanted to see what was more important to this neighborhood. My rules or this." She gestured at the gathering. James nodded thoughtfully. "You know, rules have their place. But this community needed something more than perfect lawns and regulation mailboxes. It needed connections." Karen wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. The evidence surrounded them. Neighbors who had barely spoken were now laughing together, children from different streets playing as if they'd always been friends. "Your daughter is very talented," she said instead. "She'd love to show you her dinosaur collection sometime," James replied, the invitation unmistakable. "Maybe we could start over. Neighbor to neighbor, not HOA president to rule breaker." Before Karen could answer, Sophie raced up, dinosaur face paint now smudged from exertion. "Dad, Mrs. Miller says we can use her sprinkler for the water balloon fight. Can I go?" "Water balloons on lawns are against." Karen began automatically, then stopped herself, seeing James raise eyebrow. "Actually, water evaporates. No harm done." Sophie looked between them, confused by this unexpected alliance, then shrugged and ran off. "Progress," James said with a smile. Karen wasn't ready to smile back, but she felt something shifting inside her, a rigidity beginning to crack. 3 days after the dinosaur play, Karen sat in her immaculate kitchen, staring at her resignation letter to the HOA board. She'd written and rewritten it 7 times, each version struggling to explain her decision without sounding defeated. The neighborhood was still buzzing about the successful event. A follow-up barbecue was planned for the following weekend. Karen had received an official invitation in her mailbox, handmade by Sophie, with dinosaur stickers adorning the corners. Her phone rang, her son, David, calling from college. Their conversations had grown increasingly perfunctory over the years, but she always looked forward to his calls. "Hey, Mom, how's the Age-old tyranny going?" His tone was light but held an edge that had developed during his teenage years. Instead of her usual defense, Karen found herself saying, "Actually, I'm thinking of stepping down." The silence on the other end was profound. "Are you serious?" David finally asked. "Did something happen? Are you okay?" The genuine concern in his voice made her throat tighten. "I'm fine. Just reevaluating some things." "Is this about the dinosaur guy?" "Barbara sent me the Instagram." Of course, Barbara would involve her son. "Partly," Karen admitted. "But it's more than that. I've been thinking about what you said last Christmas." David had accused her of caring more about other people's grass height than about actual relationships. It had led to their worst argument yet. "Mom, I was angry when I said that stuff." "But you weren't wrong," Karen said quietly. "I've been hiding behind rules instead of dealing with everything else." Everything else. The divorce, her identity crisis, the emptiness of her perfectly organized home, the distance between herself and her only child. "So what are you going to do?" David asked. "Besides quitting the HOA, I mean." Karen glanced out of her window at her backyard, meticulously maintained but rarely enjoyed. "I'm not entirely sure yet." After hanging up, Karen made an impulsive decision. She pulled on gardening gloves, went to her garage, and found the box of garden decorations her ex-husband had bought years ago, items she deemed too whimsical for their perfectly manicured yard. Among them was a ceramic turtle with solar-powered light-up eyes. Karen placed it beside her favorite rosebush, slightly crooked, imperfectly positioned. Its googly eyes stared back at her accusingly. "Don't start," she told it. "This is hard enough already." The next morning, Barbara stopped mid-power walk when she spotted the turtle. "Karen Westfield, is that an unauthorized garden decoration I see?" Karen straightened from where she'd been deadheading roses. "His name is Terrence, and he's exactly 13 inches tall, which is technically against Section 7, Paragraph 3. Barbara's mouth twitched. "Are you feeling all right?" "Not particularly," Karen admitted. "I've been better. And worse. I'm figuring things out." "About time," Barbara said, but her tone was kind. She hesitated, then added, "Some of us are having wine on my patio tonight. Nothing fancy. You should come." Karen's initial instinct was to decline. Social gatherings among neighbors typically devolved into gossiping about property violations, but she found herself nodding. "I'll bring that Chardonnay you like." That evening, sitting on Barbara's non-regulation patio furniture, wrought iron painted teal instead of the approved brown or black, Karen felt oddly liberated. The conversation flowed around neighborhood news, children's accomplishments, and book recommendations, not a single mention of HOA violations. "So is it true you're resigning?" Rajiv eventually asked during a lull. All eyes turned to Karen. She took a deliberate sip of wine. "I'm considering it. The position has become complicated." "Because of James?" Dorothy Wilkinson asked. "Because of me," Karen corrected. "I think I've lost perspective on what this neighborhood should be." A thoughtful silence followed. "You know," Barbara said carefully, "no one says you have to resign. You could just adapt, change your approach. Evolution rather than extinction," Dorothy added with a smile. The dinosaur metaphor again. Karen found herself smiling despite herself. "I'm not sure I know how to be any other way." "Then learn," Rajiv said simply. "People can change, Karen. Communities can too." Later, walking home under streetlights that were exactly the regulation height and brightness, Karen considered their words. Change without surrendering everything she valued. Evolution rather than extinction. As she approached her house, she noticed something on her porch. A small package wrapped in dinosaur-patterned paper. The gift tag read simply, "To help with evolution. James and Suffy." Inside was a garden gnome exactly 12 inches tall, holding a tiny sign that read, "Growth takes time." 6 weeks after what the neighborhood now referred to as the Dinosaur Revolution, Sunshine Meadows held its quarterly HOA meeting in the community center. Attendance was at a record high, with extra chairs brought in to accommodate the crowd. Karen sat at the center table, but no longer alone at the head. The board had been restructured into a more collaborative arrangement, with 5 equal members, including Karen, Barbara, Rajiv, James, and Dorothy Wilkinson. Before we begin reviewing the proposed amendments to the HOA guidelines, Karen announced, "I want to thank everyone for their patience during this transition period." The transition had not been without challenges. Some residents, particularly those who had aligned with Karen's strict enforcement policies, were resistant to change. Others wanted to abolish rules entirely, creating tension from the opposite direction. Finding middle ground had proven Karen's most challenging task yet, far more difficult than enforcing black and white regulations. Our first item concerns the proposed community spirit clause. Karen continued, nodding to James, who had drafted the addition. James stood, looking more comfortable in this formal setting than Karen had expected. The amendment essentially states that enforcement of HOA guidelines should prioritize community well-being over technical compliance when the two are in conflict. A hand rose from the back. Harold Bennett, one of Karen's oldest allies. That sounds entirely subjective. Who decides what constitutes community well-being? Karen had anticipated this question. The board will make those determinations with input from affected residents. We're proposing a monthly open forum where concerns can be raised before they escalate to violations. And what about property values? Harold pressed. Isn't that why we have an HOA in the first place? It was the question that had kept Karen awake at night, the justification she used for years of rigid enforcement. Actually, Rajiv interjected, I've been researching that very question. He distributed a report comparing property values across similar communities. While basic standards do correlate with home values, the data shows that neighborhoods with active community engagement, events, shared spaces, volunteer projects, actually maintain higher values during market downturns than those with strict rule enforcement alone. Karen watched Harold review the figures, his frown deepening as he processed information that contradicted years of assumptions. Additionally, Barbara added, we've seen increased interest in Sunshine Meadows since word spread about our community events. The real estate agent handling the Petersons' house reports multiple offers above asking price. The discussion continued for nearly 2 hours. Some amendments passed easily, more flexible guidelines for holiday decorations, a streamlined approval process for minor modifications. Others required compromise, maintenance standards remained strict, but enforcement procedures were redesigned to be more supportive than punitive. As the meeting concluded, Karen found herself surrounded by neighbors wanting to chat. Not about violations or complaints, but about the upcoming community garden project and plans for a neighborhood book exchange box. James approached with Sophie, who was proudly wearing a junior HOA member badge that the board had created for children who volunteered for community projects. Quite a different meeting from the emergency session 6 weeks ago, James observed. Karen nodded. Change isn't easy, but it's educational. Dad says you're helping me with the butterfly garden project. Sophie interjected, bouncing with enthusiasm. Karen raised an eyebrow at James, who shrugged apologetically. I might have volunteered you to help Sophie identify native plants that attract butterflies. You're the neighborhood garden expert after all. I've been researching monarch migration. Sophie continued, undeterred. Did you know they can fly thousands of miles? And they need specific plants or they'll go extinct, like the dinosaurs. Karen found herself smiling genuinely. I have several books on native gardening you might find interesting, and some milkweed seeds perfect for monarchs. Sophie's eyes widened. Really? Can we plant them today? Garden planting first, James said firmly. Maybe Karen could come over for dinner this weekend to help us map out the butterfly sanctuary. The invitation hung in the air, not just a neighborly gesture, but something with potential for more. Karen had noticed James watching her during meetings, their debates evolving from antagonistic to something approaching flirtatious. Barbara had certainly noticed, judging by her knowing smiles. I'd like that, Karen said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. As the community center emptied, Karen lingered, collecting her notes. The amended HOA guidelines now include a preamble she had written herself. Rules exist to support community, not to divide it. Outside, the summer evening was warm and inviting. Karen decided to walk home instead of driving, taking time to notice details about her neighborhood that regulations couldn't capture. The sound of children playing, the scent of grilling from multiple backyards, the way sunset painted the houses with golden light. In her front yard, Terrence the turtle's solar eyes illuminated as darkness fell. He'd been joined by 3 other garden decorations, each slightly mismatched but somehow harmonious together. Her garden was less perfect now, but more alive. On her porch sat a package she recognized immediately, another dinosaur pattern gift wrap. Karen smiled, already anticipating what new evolution might come next. The HOA still existed, rules still mattered, but now there was room for dinosaurs too.